As we approach 2027, obviously the year another general election will be held, where Tinubu's fate will be determined by Nigerians once again. Many Nigerians are now looking for alternative party, owing to the fact that they believe that the APC under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has largely disappointed Nigerians and have inflicted pain and economic hardship on Nigerians. Ikechukwu is coming out to let us know that there is no significant difference between APC and PDP.
A heated national debate is underway in Nigeria about which region gets to rule the country in the next election cycle. Well, for his down-the-middle assessment, I'm joined now by the political analyst and executive director of Development Specs Academy, Professor Ikechukwu, who's a member of the editorial board of this day newspaper and is also a professor of strategic management and human capital development, among innumerable other things. I mean, let's face it. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. You heard that argument from both sides. Let's start with what the essence of it was, which is that principle of rotation. Does it begin in 1999 or does it begin in 1960?
May I preface that with a comment?
Of course.
The statement by the Secretary to the Government of the Federation was totally unnecessary.
George Akume.
Yes, absolutely unnecessary, created a distraction. It's generating fights that are phantom fights. And to that extent, I'm not sure whether he has even served his party well. But again, somebody is free to comment. If you want to speak of leadership of Nigeria, the highest position is that of the president or head of state. And if that's the criterion you want to use to measure which region has held a larger part of that position, the verdict will be that the North has been in power for a much longer period. And you will also notice that the state decisions for the time the North was in power would, I will cite an example, take creation of states, for instance. Let us suppose I was head of state at the time, and I'm from Bayelsa State, and most of those in my government in uniform are also related from that part of the country, and we're thinking of creating states, and we use criteria. Instead of land mass, we might use water mass per square meter, in which case Bayelsa today may be about 4 states, as tiny as it is. So these are the variables on the table, but that's on the side. Now the question is, this rotational thing that has come up, let us pretend for the moment that it's about the last 24 years now, or 25. The argument of the PDP, oh, by the way, sorry, another digression. For me, there's no such thing as the PDP and the APC. If you look at the personnel, I mean, the former governor of Nasarawa State was a chairman of APC before he got thrown out in very disturbing circumstances. How many people in the strongest positions in APC today are not in PDP? Atiku himself, in fact, he has jumped around so much that he must be mistaken for a hopping expert, you know? So let's not pretend. This is about individuals who want the presidency, who need a platform for it, and who feel that, okay, if you're on this platform and it's not working, you go to another one. Now he's on a platform that he suspects may not be viable for 2027. So he's crying out in the name of the North. But the North, I see, if you remove the mask of the North, is Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. So those 2 points must be put on the table. There's no distinction between them. Is the elite struggling for highest office in the land and shopping for platforms, which we call parties, and they're all intermingled. The intermarriage is absurd. So now on the substantive matter of who has been there for too long, the argument is that the South has held it for 17 years. Let's look
Since 1999.
Yes, let's look at that argument. Yeah. Obasanjo was around for 8 years. Yar'Adua came on to stay for 8 years. The Constitution provides that if for some circumstance the president is unable to carry out his function, the vice president takes over. But this is a country where anything can be configured despite what the Constitution provides. Now, the North didn't like the fact that Yar'Adua had passed. They didn't like the fact that Jonathan was going to take over. The doctrine of necessity came up after long negotiations. And let us not forget that it was the North that allowed him to contest. Why everybody became angry was that he didn't, quote unquote, fulfill all the elements of this thing. So at the risk of sounding mischievous, this thesis must be put on the table. That Jonathan would not have continued if there was vociferous, implacable opposition from the North. If the North had said, we're out of this, So to that extent, it was a negotiated Jonathan presidency considered by those presumed to have that time. So that must be part of the conversation.
Well, the argument could be made. You're talking about 2011, basically. Yeah, the argument could be made that the North kept quiet, and some of them have in fact made that because they were hoping that Buhari would win in 2011. When he lost, there were riots in the North. People died, properties were destroyed. There was a lot of anger in the North, and you could feel it across Nigeria.
Well,
so it's not like they threw their arms open and said, or crossed their legs and said, let him sort of go.
See another perspective. The riots were the riots of the masses who were excited about Baba, called Buhari. The northern elite, were they part of that riot? They were part of the conversation.
They certainly were not.
Precisely. So that distinction must be made. When you speak of the North, look at the configuration. It didn't build up, it didn't draw political capital. It was just the people, the partly naked young boys and children all over the place. So that must be put on the table. Now, coming to the matter of what should happen now. For me, it's a question of political realism. Is it possible to dislodge the incumbent president? Question number one. Would it make sense to say that, yes, he's been around, if other presidents have had 8 years in principle, bearing the circumstance of Buhari, of Yar'Adua, that he should also have 8 years in principle? My take is that the aspiration to dislodge him will be somewhat delusional, speaking politically and given the context in
and
which
speaking realistically in the context of Nigeria.
Of the Nigerian state, of the political configurations at play, of the fact that the president himself is a great strategist, negotiator. Charles, what is your problem? Let's find out how to deal with it so you get accommodated in this. So I believe they can pull that off. Now, I even think that the controversy is being, is being fanned to acquire a profile he does not possess at all. Because Atiku is thinking of his own, justifiably, he's a human being, he wants to be president. The only subject matter I see him addressing is Alhaji Atiku Abubakar's aspiration. Because if it's about good governance, there are other younger people he could have supported. All of these things must be put on the table and put in perspective. And concerning the profile of the PDP, and I think that's something I would probably want to make a tangential comment on. You may recall that I once wrote an article on the back page of This Day. The title was PDP and Rumor Mongering. Riot in Legacy has something of the sort, those two articles. The PDP, in my view, and I think I've even said it on your program, has a very impressive record of incompetence in political opposition. Absolute incompetence. What is it the PDP does except to grumble occasionally? You are in the opposition. Let's have alternative policies. Let's have your shadow cabinet. Let's see a party in existence, not individuals who can't even hold.
I remember you talked about a shadow cabinet.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So to come and to begin now to suddenly begin to cry out. In fact, what I will understand is, the PDP is now speaking for the interests of the North. That's why the PDP exists. And Kasim made a solid point about the constitution of the party. The party closed its eyes, scandalized itself, and then lost. And all of that. So the argument about, the North has been in this, it doesn't wash. It's because of the
right. Okay. Well, let me say this: that first of all, without taking sides, we need to establish I think the argument is not whether they can dislodge Tinubu in 2027. It is about establishing the principle. And saying the principle has rectitude, and this is what is the right thing to do in 2027. Just the principle, not so much, because to get Tinubu out and all that, it's going to be very difficult. But also, you have to reform so much in this country. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the North also makes the argument that it is not fair on them to say that the North has been ruling this country for 48 years, because most of that time has been military rule through the barrel of a gun, where they themselves were subjected to dominance, just like any other person in the country, and they couldn't have done anything to get rid of that government. So it's not technically, they don't want to put ownership on those governments. You see the point I'm making?
I see the point.
Yeah.
I agree in principle, because It's not like it was the North that organized and put them in place. So
Absolutely.
I'm not interested in pushing that point. But let's even assume that the North has actually ruled for 48 years. It does not remove the fact that we're talking about the period of democratic governance. So I don't want to join the mischief of saying, oh, they've been around for 48 years, therefore. No, for the period they were around, what were the paradigms for engagement? By what processes were leaders thrown up? And all of that. It doesn't matter if those governments serve the interests of the North. If you look at the Buhari tenure, for instance, it can be described as having been a predominantly northern government. But not because he consulted the North. If anything, I think he did the greatest damage to the North by the kind of configuration he had in his government, which created the illusion that it was the North, whereas it was a man with his own parochial inclinations. So coming around to the principle, as you say, it will be difficult to argue successfully that the presidency should not be in the South by 2027. I can understand, it's in the context of that I say, well, I understand why Akume said that, but I don't think he needed to. It's a political thing that will come up, context will take place and the rest of it. But no,
So you don't think there's any merit to the argument that Mr. Atiku is making that out of the 16 years, I mean, we've established that during military rule and so on, the North really didn't have ownership it wasn't a democratic government. You don't think there's any merit in the fact that out of the 16 years that, for example, the PDP has been in power, the North has had 3 years of the PDP's time, and the South has had 13 years. In the APC, the North has had 8 years, and the South is en route to having 4 years, and possibly another 4. At least it's insisting on another 4, at least some of people are. And by 2031, the South would have been in power since 1999 for 25 years. And, I mean, does that seem fair?
It's not about fairness, it's about realism. It's about force majeure in law. That two of us plan that you're going to supply me some equipment. If you don't supply it, you're going to pay me 50,000 naira for it. Then you set out as agreed, as we signed, and then the bridge connecting your part of the city to mine is taken away by flood. You can't pay me 50,000 because you didn't cause the bridge to break. Indeed. So the crisis of the Yaradua-Jonathan era was force majeure. There was a constitutional provision for it. You cannot then on the basis of that say, no, it hadn't been the North. But also, Jonathan didn't have to do a full tenure, which was a concession, which was agreed on, which was plotted, etc. So if you give me your turn in a table tennis game, and then the next team comes up, you say, oh, remember I ceded a turn. Let's not forget the bitterness that made 5 governors leave, that made also Jonathan to lose. They said, the man, this is not what we agreed with him. I don't know whether that is a fact or not, but it was the Northern Revolt, if you ask me. And even in spite of that, Jonathan could have won that election, because if 5 governors left and still APC could only beat him with about 2 million votes, it showed that that was his election. What am I leading up to? We can't at this moment be arguing fairness when we all invoked the doctrine of necessity, when we know that force majeure is a fact of life and a fact in law, when we know that there was negotiation, when you know that the North took a position, listen, after this, please be of good behavior, we'll allow you to go. So Atiku is making a point, but it will seem to me that that point, no matter how credible it might seem or sound, it's self-serving. I'm waiting to hear the North rally around that argument, since he says speaking for the North. I'm even waiting for PDP stalwarts to rally around that argument. What I see is an environment where, yes, he's taking a position in the name of the PDP, but it's a personal position. I see where somebody is arguing about principle and fairness, whereas the issue is that we are being asked to ignore some fundamentals that led to the circumstance that everybody is saying it doesn't exist. No, no, no. We can't pretend we didn't do those things. We can't pretend Jonathan wasn't negotiated with. And if we're going to be frank about it, let him say, I will contest and defeat APC candidates, because you can't prevent PDP from contesting. So start preparing for the election. You're not going to tell me, if I want to vote for you, you say, oh, the party said it's only for a southerner. No, no, no. If he has the leverage, if he has the leverage and the clout, Shekara won elections in this country. He was a teacher. He didn't have the money, he didn't have the resources. He contested. He blew the other guy out of the water because the people said, this man will give us good service. That's where Atiku should be looking at.
Okay.
That's my take on that. He should be looking in the direction of what is it that will make me so marketable that it doesn't matter who contests against me. You know.
On that note, indeed, on that note,
that both parties operate on the same template. Many has agreed and aligned with the position of Ikechukwu. Also, the fact that the same people who were in PDP are now in APC, and those who were in APC in the same vein are now in PDP. So they are crops of the same people. So it will be very difficult for us to jettison APC for PDP. What do you think about this? Drop your thoughts. Let's